I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, bracing for fallout. Block trades seize on market sentiment following revelations that banks, including Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, liquidated holdings in Bill Hwang's family office, Archegos Capital Management, Friday, after he failed to meet margin calls. Plus, impending doom, a warning from the head of the CDC with COVID cases on the rise again. We'll talk to Everlywell, which got the green light from the government to sell at-home testing kits back in May. Its business still booming. And Facebook's future, from headsets to wristbands. We'll talk augmented and virtual reality with the head of Facebook's Reality Labs, Andrew Bosworth, one of the social network's longest-running executives, who's been one of Mark Zuckerberg's most loyal deputies and helped weather some of the biggest controversies from the very beginning. We'll begin, though, with those block trades that have seized on investor sentiment. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta and Ed Ludlow here to talk about the market decline. Kriti, let's start with you.
Well, Emily, so much hype built into today's open, and yet you didn't see a ton of action. You actually saw the S&P end just about flat. Take a look at the chart behind me, or the board behind me, I should say. A little bit of a mixed picture as we go from index to index. I'm just going to walk you through here. So we're starting with the S&P about flat. The NASDAQ 100 down 0.1%, not a major move there. Here's where all the action was. It was in those small caps, down 2.8%, and of course some pain in the semiconductors index as well. What's important to note here is that the big tech names, Apple's, Facebook, Google, those were really the ones that lifted the S&P 500 higher, and that's why you didn't see the same pain in the S&P 500 that you did in, say, the small caps or the semiconductors. Flip up the boards, and I really want to show you the NASDAQ 100, for example. Here's where we're seeing some tech pain today, a little bit of a pullback. But if you look at this on a 2-week basis, not much of a move, starting right where we were 2 weeks ago, not making much progress. So we want to see whether there is a ton of momentum to move those tech names, those broader tech names, either higher or lower, and right now you're just kind of seeing them tread water. I want to flip up the boards, though, and bring you to the major story today. Of course, that Archegos Capital Fund blow up. And I just want to show you the volume here. I mean, take a look at this. That's the volume of all the stocks that were involved with those trades. That is just today compared to the stacked volume you've seen going all the way back. So it really tells you that, of course, that the story from Friday, the story from this weekend certainly played into the narrative today. The question is if it plays into tomorrow. So that's the macro story. Let's go to the micro story with Ed Ludlow.
Yeah, let's dig into those names that were at the heart of the block trade selling spree, which hasn't just been a Monday story, it's been a multi-day event. Flip up the boards, though, and let's look at Monday's trading, because at the heart of this, one of the stocks in focus, of course, is Viacom CBS. Down almost 7% at the close, but had been down as much as 11% at its lowest level now since January. Multi-days of declines. Discovery also down 1.6% after such a dramatic fall on Friday of 27%, 6 straight days of declines. The other part of this story, of course, is the ADRs, American Depository Receipts of Chinese companies. But the context here is not about one single day. Flip up the boards and look at the 5-day changes, 5-session changes of some of these names. This is the result. This is the impact that we're seeing. And then if we move on and look at the banks at the center of this story, those facilitating that liquidation, those block trades, there's also some interesting stories within that as well. Starting off, of course, with some of the Americans' banks. Goldman Sachs off by just 0.5%, Morgan Stanley down 2.6%. According to sources, Morgan Stanley was still shopping a large block of Viacom CBS shares on Sunday. According to a single source, Goldman Sachs is telling clients and shareholders that it is insulated in terms of losses from its exposure to those stocks at the heart of this story. Really, the story is in Europe and in Asia, right? Credit Suisse off by almost 14%. Nomura off by almost 16.5%. Credit Suisse and other lenders are still in the process of exiting some of those positions, according to a company statement. And Nomura falling by a record with some big exposure. They didn't name for who, but they're saying there was exposure, Emily.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, thanks so much for breaking that down. With more on the hows, whys, what's next, we've got our Bloomberg anchor, Romaine Bostick, with us, who just wrapped a special on this topic. Romaine, give us a bit of an explainer first. What exactly is a margin call, and how did this happen in the first place?
Yeah, so with the margin call, it's basically you're borrowing to buy a security or buy sort of a block of securities here. This is effectively where you can sort of use leverage to borrow something. If you make money on it, effectively you make more money than you actually had. The idea here is that that leverage sort of gives you the ability for more upside. Of course, that leverage can work against you. So if you buy something on margin, you're basically borrowing. The dealer basically requires that you have a certain amount of collateral. That collateral is basically the stock effectively that you're buying. And it says as long as the stock remains at a minimum level, you're okay. If the stock falls below a minimum level, then the broker comes back and says you need to either put up more collateral, actual cash, meaning to cover that gap, or you have to sort of give us the securities themselves. On a small scale, this is not really problematic. It happens all the time. Margin calls are relatively common. But on the scale of what we saw with Archegos, where we're talking basically what, at least by Bloomberg estimates, was about $20 billion in total securities here, that type of margin call probably means that the borrower doesn't necessarily have the cash in his or her pocket to cover that immediately.
So doesn't margin debt go up, though, when stocks go up, as they have been? And is this why is this in particular such a big deal?
It's really the scale, Emily, because like I said, I mean, this type of stuff happens on a day-to-day basis, particularly with hedge funds. This is what they do. They effectively leverage their positions in order to get better gains here. The problem, of course, is when those trades start to work against you, you have to cover those positions in some way or another. By some accounts here, and again, this is based on Bloomberg reporting, this was a family office that by some accounts was actually larger than most of the hedge funds that we normally cover here on Bloomberg television. It had a tremendous amount of scale, and from what we know, a big part of that money, that $20 billion estimate, was actually concentrated in a small handful of stocks, which exacerbated the situation when that margin call came.
Right. So I guess the big question is this going to kick off a broader market pullback or not?
Well, the consensus right now seems to be no, although you'll find a few people out there that say this is actually kind of endemic of something that's been really going on in the market. A lot of people really brushed off the GameStop saga at the time. They said, okay, this is just about GameStop. This is just about a small group of investors. But of course, now they're looking at what happened with this current issue here, and they're saying this is happening over and over again. Now, the incidences may not be related, but the idea is that when you sort of amalgamate them together, it raises issues about market transparency and really about market fairness. And a lot of folks that we spoke to today, including on the special that we just aired on Bloomberg Television, said this is the type of thing that gets regulators' attention. It's the type of things that has the regulators really coming into the picture right now and saying maybe we need to change things. And typically for Wall Street, that's not what they want to hear.
All right, Romaine, thanks so much for breaking it down. Obviously, we'll continue to follow by the day. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick there. Thank you. Coming up, Amazon is at the center of one of the most consequential union elections in recent history. The vote counting underway at this moment could determine the fate of thousands of workers in Alabama. We will have the latest next. This is Bloomberg.
What I say to Mr. Bezos, why, when you have so much money, more money that can be spent in a million lifetimes, why are you spending millions trying to defeat an effort on the part of workers here who want nothing more than decent wages, decent benefits, decent working conditions? The reason that Amazon is putting so much energy to try to defeat you is they know that if you succeed here, it will spread all over this country.
Senator Bernie Sanders there speaking with Amazon workers in Alabama Friday in a dramatic call to action. The historic union vote happening as we speak. Counting the vote will take a few more days. For more on the story, how it's unfolding, and what is at stake, Josh Idelson, our Bloomberg government reporter, joins us now, who covers workplace issues. So, Josh, when exactly will we know, and how likely is it the union wins?
We don't know, among other things, when we'll know, because it depends in part how long it takes for the two sides to go over whose eligibility they're contesting. nobody knows exactly what the outcome will be here. We do know that on the one hand, Amazon is facing this biggest election they've faced in the US and a wave of worker protest and scrutiny they hadn't before the past few years. And on the other hand, that a win in a labor board unionization election at a top non-union employer in the US is something that is quite few and far between in recent decades.
So if the union wins, what happens? And does it spread to other states?
If the union wins the election, then Amazon will have an opportunity to contest that outcome. And if the outcome is finalized, we've seen companies successfully stall negotiations or prevent a contract from being reached for quite a while. We will see inevitably litigation and struggle around these issues for a long time regardless. But should the workers win the election, it would be a tremendous symbolic victory and escalate the pressure on the company and escalate the organizing going on around the country. If the union loses, we will continue to see workers taking up struggle and collective action against the company. Some, I imagine, will go back to the labor board in their own workplaces, and some will look to other avenues.
Now, Amazon has been pushing back on this, revival of union agitation really aggressively. A tweet from the Amazon News official Twitter handle pushing back on speculation that Amazon workers pee in bottles on the job, claiming that there are millions of workers around the world who are completely happy. What do you make of that strategy and Amazon's response?
Amazon clearly is choosing to take an aggressive tact here and making its pushback the story. That back and forth, I think, will have much less impact on workers actually voting than what Amazon has been doing in the workplace, like the mandatory anti-union meetings that the company employees have discussed being forced to attend. But it reflects how this is a major national political issue, and whatever happens here, the experience at Amazon will be Exhibit A in the push by unions and Democratic lawmakers to change the labor law system.
Josh Adelson, Bloomberg News, thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue to follow how that vote plays out in Alabama and beyond. All right, coming up, imagine your next meeting, not at home or in the office, but in virtual reality. Facebook's Andrew Bosworth says it's coming fast. My exclusive interview with the head of the social network's Reality Labs is next. And as we head to break, let's take a look at FANG stocks trading. Facebook leading the gains. We'll keep our eye on all this. This is Bloomberg. We've got some breaking headlines out of Nissan at the moment. Bloomberg has just conducted an interview with the company's former top lawyer, Ravinder Passy, who is accusing Nissan of surveilling his family and others. There's a pretty complicated backstory here, but if you remember, Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Nissan, was arrested and jailed for misconduct. There's now an ongoing investigation into his behavior as well as the behavior of other executives. This former top lawyer, Ravinder Passy, was charged with doing an investigation into Nissan's handling of the situation. He was then demoted and is now suing the company for wrongful termination. He says he can't comment on any ongoing legislation, but one of the biggest bombshells from this interview, his claim that the company surveilled him and his family. We've got a response from Nissan here to Passy's claim, saying Nissan is contesting the claim, which contains numerous mischaracterized allegations. We're unable to comment further on a matter which is subject to ongoing litigation. We'll continue to watch for more developments on that story. Meantime, it has been 7 years since Facebook bought Oculus for $2 billion as a big bet on virtual reality, but the headset still hasn't gained a mainstream moment. I caught up with Andrew Bosworth, Facebook's vice president of Reality Labs, to hear his vision for the Oculus Quest and whether it'll be used beyond gaming. Take a listen.
We think this could be the next generalized compute platform. And it's starting with gamers, but it's already breaking out a little beyond that. So you're seeing fitness, for example, as a really popular emerging category. Virtual reality offers us a window into how it could be better, how two people who aren't physically able to be together could still have an experience that really felt like they were together, like they were having a shared experience of life. And that's what the potential for VR is. And Quest is kind of the first really mainstream headset that can start to deliver on that promise, even if only in little pockets for now.
So it feels like we've been talking about the potential and the promise for a long time. I remember that moment when Facebook bought Oculus in 2014, and it still hasn't had that mainstream moment, if you will. When does that happen? Is it still a few years off?
Well, if you look a little closely, I think it's starting to happen right now. The fact that Oculus Quest 2, in just a few months in the market, has outsold not just its predecessor, but all of its predecessors combined, is a tremendous indicator that we are now at that point where we've broken through from the early adopter crowd to an increasingly mainstream crowd.
So how many hours a day do you spend inside an Oculus headset, if you don't mind me asking?
We spend a lot of time play testing, and we're starting to do meetings in virtual reality as well in my team. So just yesterday, I was probably in the headset for 2.5 hours. It's not every day like that, but some days are like that. I definitely get good use out of my battery.
Now, coming out of the pandemic, do you think there will be the same appetite to socialize in virtual reality, in augmented reality, when we can actually be with each other in person? Will there be demand for that?
Yeah, I mean, we had this vision long before the pandemic came along. We are separated from people we love all the time. And we are increasingly in a global workforce where people we want to collaborate with aren't necessarily going to be right next door. So I think this technology has so much more promise than we're giving it credit for to transform the landscape of global work and the opportunity that people have as it becomes more and more mainstream and more available.
We tried it out this weekend. You've got one person in a headset there in their own world, rather than in a world with us. And I wonder how do we make AR and VR more social?
Well, I think you've struck on two really important things. The first one is virtual reality is great for being social with people who physically aren't with you. It is not great for being social with people who are physically next to you. Augmented reality could really move us forward on these things, where you could both be present in the real moment and also be more connected, whether it be capturing memories or inviting people to join you virtually so that you and everyone who's physically together can see them and interact with them as if they were really there, and they can feel there as well. So I do think we are just now getting to glimpses of a future that allows us to bring presentness and connectedness together.
How do you bring down the cost, though? Right now, it's not very affordable, especially if you want multiple people in a headset.
Bringing the cost down is so central to what we are doing at Facebook. But I want to point out, we're 5 years now from the anniversary of the launch of the first Oculus headset, the Oculus Rift. That headset, when you took its initial price, plus it had to be attached to a pretty beefy gaming PC to even run, the total cost of ownership was almost $2,000. And now today, you've got the Oculus Quest 2, and you can get this thing for $299. That's an incredible reduction of price in a relatively short period of time.
So you're building a wristband to go with the headset. Why a wristband?
If you think about the way you use your laptop, you use a keyboard and mouse. The way that you use your phone is via touchscreen. If you had augmented reality glasses and they have a display and they have cameras and they have all these sensors, how do you communicate with it? You're not going to have a laptop. You're walking around in the world. You're not going to have a keyboard or a mouse. So what can we do? Well, it turns out the wrist is an excellent place for us to be able to detect motor signals that you've sent to your hand. And in fact, we can detect them so well, you don't actually have to move your hand for us to detect them. So over the fullness of time, you could type, you could manipulate, you could scroll without having to move a muscle, just by expressing an intention down your arm and having the machine react to it. So we think the wrist is a really promising place to explore. Now, that's still in research phase right now, but we're making progress.
Will it also be a watch?
Well, I think that's another thing that's attractive about the wrist is that we are, as a society, used to things being on wrists, whether it be watches or bracelets. So yeah, I think we'd love to be able to do more than just that on the wrist. Absolutely.
You also oversee Portal. Curious how Portal did through the work from home period and what sort of interesting learnings you've had there.
I mean, Portal was a tremendous success over the course of the pandemic. I think as people were feeling isolated from loved ones, they sought out ways to connect with them more richly. And Portal's a great way to do it, especially with full families, where you're going to have more than one person in the frame, and you're talking to Nana, you're talking to Grandpa. You want them to be able to read stories to the kids, and Portal does all of that.
That said, you are playing catch up to other similar devices. Are you going to be releasing annual updates? Do you have plans for a voice assistant like Alexa?
Well, we have a voice assistant on the devices, and we've just actually announced recently that we're naming it Hey Facebook. Previously, it was just Hey Portal. I'm actually worried that all my devices will turn on, but I've correctly turned them all off beforehand. Okay. And so we do have our own assistant, but it's not really trying to do the same thing as Alexa, because these devices also ship with Alexa, as you probably know. And so the point is to do, what are the things that we can uniquely do on Facebook around getting content, sharing, and calling specific people?
If AR is the future of work and more of the future of education, the future of consumer interaction, could we create a new digital divide? What about the people who can't access this technology, who can't afford this technology, who don't want this technology?
It's a huge problem. I absolutely worry about that as it relates to AR and VR. It's one of the things that the best thing you can do is popularize the technology. That's what drives the prices down and makes it more accessible. And smartphones have shown us the way. Smartphones are largely accessible, across a pretty broad swath of society at this point. And that only took 10 years. It took 10 years of it becoming the most popular device in the history of the world, but it did make it so that you can get a pretty affordable smartphone at this point. And so I think it's top concern for us is how can we get this technology out there, make it popular enough to drive the cost down, to make it universally accessible.
The head of Facebook Reality Labs, Andrew Bosworth, aka Boz. We're going to talk to him about his 15 years at the social network, the lessons he's learned, and why he still believes Facebook is making the world a better place, despite many people who believe the opposite. More of that interview coming next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. More now from Facebook Reality Labs Vice President Andrew Bosworth. He just told us how he believes augmented and virtual realities will become more accessible and affordable in the near future. His time at Facebook began near its infancy back in 2006 when he created the news feed. Since then, the company has seen rapid growth along with, it seems, never-ending challenges. I asked him to respond to Facebook's harshest critics who believe the social network is doing far more harm to the world than good.
My 15 years at Facebook have not been monolithic. I've loved the company. I certainly love the people at the company, and the work we do inspires me. But I've also gotten to do so many different things. I mean, if you look at the work that I'm doing now in augmented reality and virtual reality, it's a far cry from where I started working on Newsfeed and Messenger and groups. They're just very different.
Now, Mark has, since the very beginning, argued that Facebook is making the world a better place. But now you have so many people that believe the opposite. Have you asked yourself the question, are we doing as much good as we think we are? Are we actually making the world a better place? Or is the opposite true?
Yeah, no, I think the criticism that's really built up over the course of the last decade has been really fair. And I take all of that seriously and introspect on it often. For me, I definitely still believe in the fundamental good of creating tools that help people connect and give them the power to share and have a voice. But clearly, we didn't spend enough, as not just Facebook, but as an entire industry, time thinking about the negative externalities, the ways in which these technologies would be abused. That is, to some degree, I think, one of the great benefits that I have doing the work that I'm doing now within Facebook. I get to benefit from a global conversation about privacy, which has never been more important or more clearly articulated, a global conversation about what do we think is good about technology and what do we think is not worth the problems that it creates. And we're doing that years in advance of things like augmented reality glasses being real. And think about how different that is from how Facebook was, when I started 15 years ago, how the entire industry was 15 years ago. We never used to talk about these problems years in advance with the public. And so, yeah, I do take those criticisms seriously. I think they're important and I value them. And I'm hoping that those criticisms coming at this stage of technology development is what makes this next round of technological innovation different from the last.
So as you're trying to recreate these virtual worlds, I'm sure you're thinking a lot about how do we not recreate Facebook's challenges and biggest problems in a headset? What are some of the ethical scenarios you're trying to troubleshoot and map out before we get there?
Number one for me actually is easy. It's making sure there's tremendous transparency about what the technology is doing and why. What data is it gathering? Why is it gathering it? How is it doing it? Where is it stored? Can it be done locally on device? Does it have to go to the server? And how can the consumer control all of that? The more people understand, I really believe in giving that power to people to choose for themselves and start to decide. Some problems you never escape, no matter how much you plan for them. Content moderation will be a problem forever. It's been a problem since long before the internet, and it'll be a problem long after I retire. That doesn't mean you can't do better than you've been doing. Doesn't mean you can't make a lot of progress. And so on content moderation, how can you build a community where this is less necessary? What kinds of standards can you create? When you do have content moderation challenges, how can you approach them? The issues that we're talking about here, security, privacy, content, these aren't new issues, but they will take new form in virtual and augmented reality. And unlike in previous iterations, we are trying to get ahead of them well in advance of those things becoming a mainstream concern.
What about the unintended consequences that you can't predict?
I think we can do a lot better job than we have historically because we have a historical record of the types of abuses that have happened in digitally connected spaces. But you're absolutely right. There are going to be novel forms of abuse. There are going to be things that we didn't anticipate. And we just have to be agile and responsive to those things, and that's true of any business. I think the critique of the entire industry over the last 10 years that we were Pollyannish, focused on the good we could create at the risk of not seeing all the negative that could come of it is fair and accurate. That's the mistake we're trying to avoid going forward.
So, this new world, we have sensors, we have glasses, we've got GPS. This is a whole new set of technological challenges. Why should we trust Facebook? Why should we trust that Facebook will handle these challenges correctly?
Yeah, there's no shortcut to trust. Trust is setting expectations and meeting them or exceeding them consistently over time. That's the formula for trust. It takes a long time. And that's the work that we're doing. That's the job that I have, is to put this work out here early, have these conversations out in the open, and ensure the technology works with a sufficient degree of transparency and control that people do feel confident that they can trust it and that it's something that's valuable enough for them to engage with it all.
Has the criticism of Facebook, as somebody who's worked there for so long, has that been hard for you? Do you think it's at all unfair?
Yeah, it's hard, especially when you agree with it. And I think that, nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to screw up. Nobody wants to miss some negative consequence of their work. But that just kind of redoubles my resolve to improve, to do better, because I believe this technology is important. And I believe we as a society will integrate it successfully into how we operate and how we vote and how we make progress in science and how we make progress in technology and how we communicate. So yeah, it's not easy to have someone pointing out all of the things that you've not done as well as you'd hoped, but it shouldn't be easy. That's seems like it's correct. The system is working as intended.
I am curious more broadly, what are your thoughts on tech addiction in general and the concern that we're creating a generation of people, children, parents, who are addicted to technology in a way that is unhealthy.
Yeah, I bristle a little bit about the use of the term addiction here, and I realize there's debate between sociologists and psychologists on this. I having known in my family people who really struggle with addiction, I've never met anybody, who went homeless because they were looking for a fix of their internet. I think there is a bit of a moral panic there, and fundamentally, my conviction is that people should have control. The individual, each person, should have the ability to set their own limits, to understand what the technology is doing. They should be in control of their own decisions. And I trust them to do that. I really do. I trust myself, I trust my kids, and I trust people, individuals in society to be able to do that.
So since you mentioned children, let's talk about the next generation. I'm sure you see a lot of potential for AR and VR as an educational tool. How will this change our children's lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's to some degree, we haven't even integrated yet the changes that the internet has made in our children's lives. Things like, how many of us were raised in school being told, listen, you're not going to be able to just look up any information wherever you are in the world, which is totally false. I can definitely look up information almost anywhere I am in the world now. Or we're told you're not going to have a calculator with you just when you go about your life. I absolutely have a calculator with me at all times. So I do think we haven't even fully integrated the previous generation of technology that our kids have access to in terms of how we educate and how we develop. But I do think virtual reality and augmented reality probably have the most promise for kids who today don't have geographic access to quality education or experiences, who don't have the economic access to those types of experiences.
That said, Instagram is working on a version for kids 13 and younger. As a parent, I'm wondering, is this cool or is this my worst nightmare?
I think every parent still has to be a parent. And it doesn't matter if the challenge is Instagram or it's TV or it's books or it's bicycles. As a parent, you have to decide how to help your kid understand how to set limits for themselves, how to be responsible for their choices, and what the consequences of those choices will be. My kids are 6 and 3, so my daughter right now thinks that just swiping around will somehow cause dresses to appear at her front door. So we're still a little bit ways away from that. But yeah, no, I think, again, for me, so much of my parenting style, and I think an emerging style that's very popular, is giving people, especially young children, exposure to things in ways that are really supervised and safe so that they do develop good habits. Because otherwise what happens when the kids are not exposed to it, they're kind of kept from it. And then later on, they suddenly get access to it. They don't have the tools to manage their own emotional state as it relates to the tool, their engagement with the tool. So my personal belief as a parent is that it's really good to be able to be in these supervised environments, these controlled environments where you can establish good habits.
So take me ahead then 10 years. Do we all still have phones, and do we all have glasses too? And a wristband?
In 10 years is hard. 10 years is right on the borderline. Let me give you 20.
15, 20.
Yeah, 15 to 20. I think in 15 to 20 years, I think you don't have a phone anymore necessarily, though you may still have a device that you carry with you that's in that form factor that does multiple jobs. I think you probably will have a number of sensors, probably on the wrist for things like input, and it's also pretty convenient. I think you'll probably have things kind of like these AirPods or something equivalent to that if you really want to get more immersed in audio. Audio is so important to feeling immersed in a situation, as well as AR glasses. And I think what's really different actually is our homes and the way they're laid out when you don't have to put TVs in a specific location, when you can work from kind of literally anywhere. And I think cities will be very laid out differently. If virtual reality really takes off and fulfills its promise, why would I fight an hour of traffic to get to my office where they're paying rent to keep it empty all night and I'm paying rent to keep my house empty all day, and fight an hour on the way back when I could, if I really could get great eye contact, that great feeling of presence, why would I do that? I could live wherever I wanted to live, have those rich collaborative experiences. And you know who's going to benefit from those 2 hours I'm not in the car? It's my kids, face-to-face time, the real connection. And so I think VR also has the profound opportunity to change the way we think about cities and where we live and our relationship to work. Because right now, those things have to be together in many cases, because that is the value of face-to-face communication. If you can get at that virtually, that's a big opportunity.
Andrew Bosworth there, Vice President of Facebook Reality Labs. You can catch more of that interview at Bloomberg.com. All right, coming up, 1 year into the pandemic, we're taking a look at the soaring demand for online mental health apps. Our weekly work shifting segment is next. This is Bloomberg.
Suicides are up, mental health needs are increasing, violence against women and children is increasing. A lot of folks are losing hope.
Nobody can doubt the serious damage that is done by lockdowns to people's mental health, to jobs, to livelihoods.
This pandemic is having an impact on mental health for most, if not all of us.
I've heard my own CEO say this, where the 9-to-5 workday is dead, and I think that's so true for me, because I've now shut down during the day where I just need to go for a walk. This is really important for me to be able to do this and just take time out of my day to care for my own health and my well-being.
It is no secret that the pandemic has taken a toll on businesses, careers, livelihoods, but the focus on getting rid of the virus, with that, many agree more needs to be done for all of our mental health. In a recent study out by the on-demand mental health care company Ginger, 96% of CEOs think they're doing enough for employee health, but only 69% of employees agree. Meantime, the report says that 48% of employees have experienced significant or extreme stress in the last year. The company also seeing a nearly 270% increase in demand for coaching support, a 365% increase in demand for therapy. Joining me now to discuss, the CEO of Ginger, Russell Glass, in part of our work shifting conversation. Russ, thank you so much for joining us. So you did a lot of research. You've been doing a lot of research. What are the most shocking trends that you have seen?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is the third year we've done this study. And, one of the trends that's just astonishing is how each year we see more and more of the population that has a need. And of course, the pandemic accelerated that. This year, we're seeing more than 40% of adults have some sort of depression or anxiety. 60% of those under 25 are presenting with these needs. So just staggering numbers of the population have these needs right now.
So you've just raised a lot of money. You're working with Blackstone, $1 billion valuation. What do you think the future is of on-demand mental health, and how does it differ from, a traditional therapist or psychiatrist, which, many people have had access to for years?
Few thoughts. First of all, we raised the money this year from Blackstone because we recognized that there was this increasing need. We don't have anywhere near the number of providers to take care of all of these people. And as we looked at the cost to society, the estimates are that it costs the United States alone about $1 trillion a year to manage the mental health issues that we have. We recognize that this may be the single largest societal issue of our time. And we wanted to raise money to make sure we could continue to invest in the solutions needed to solve this problem. And Ginger's focus here is, how do we take technology? How do we take research and development? How do we create new care models and payment models? And finally, how do we scale the amount of care that we can deliver to solve these problems for our society?
So as we go into some sort of new normal, we're in this sort of messy middle period. What are your biggest concerns about the disconnect between employers and employees, between governments, schools, and students?
Well, there is some good news. I think that if you look at the results, what we're seeing is this period has actually increased the understanding of the need. So, huge numbers, like 92% of CEOs are saying that their companies have increased focus on mental health over the last year. We're seeing 94% of CEOs actually saying that they received some kind of mental health support themselves over this period of time. But as you said earlier in the segment, there's still a gap between the perception of what companies are delivering and what employees are feeling on the ground. So I worry about that. I worry that companies think they're doing enough, but then they're not actually, because employees aren't seeing it yet. And I think it's going to take companies not only focusing on providing solutions, but also providing communications, talking to their employees, making sure that employees know it's okay to reach out and get help, basically helping to reduce that stigma that still seems to exist out there.
All right. Russell Glass, CEO of Ginger, thank you so much for joining us to talk about a very important topic and important work you're doing. Thank you. All right, still ahead, the U.S. sees signs that the fourth wave of COVID infections is underway, with cases and deaths surging while testing levels slump. We're going to speak to the founder and CEO of Everlywell about their home testing kits and why wide-scale testing is still important. That is next. And as we head to break, chips in focus with the stocks down more than 1.5%. Keep your eye on this space. Stifel analyst Matthew Sheeran says supply shortages appear to be worsening. Not good news. This is Bloomberg.
I'm going to lose the script, and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared.
That was the head of the CDC there, fighting back tears after warning of impending doom as cases, hospitalizations, deaths begin to rise again. The 7-day average of hospital admissions with confirmed or suspected cases of COVID-19 are up in half of the United States. This is testing levels in the country have stagnated, even declined in recent months as states shift their focus to vaccines. Joining us now to discuss, Everlywell founder and CEO Julia Cheek, the provider of home testing kits, which just made its first 2 acquisitions, now said to be valued at almost $3 billion. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. What's your reaction to what the head of the CDC just said there?
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me today. Yes, I think this is a really critical moment for the U.S. to be able to combine the mass rollout of vaccinations with continued testing. And in addition to that, just the behaviors that we've all adopted over the last year. We have so much ahead. We have the promise of a new dawn, but being able to stay safe during this vaccine acceleration, I think, is of the utmost importance. And testing has stagnated because people aren't going to get testing as often or as frequently. And yet the testing modalities have really improved. Most people can get tested within the day or within a couple of days. The FDA has rapidly approved new formats of testing as well. So just another voice of caution to say, if we stay the course for another few months, I think we have a bright future ahead.
So talk to us about the demand you've seen over the last year. You were one of the first companies that was approved to do home testing kits. Many people took advantage of that, and now it sounds like behaviors are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Everlywell was in a position to be able to innovate quickly and to serve at a national scale. And many companies have been able to follow suit with the FDA's quick work and making sure that we ramped testing after the initial slowness. However, what we're seeing is a lot of employer demand and a lot of university demand and state demand, but individuals are not going to get tested as often, largely because I think there is pandemic fatigue, which is totally understandable. But what we're seeing across the board, and I think you hear it from testing rates as well, which are published, is the testing frequency is just declining. And as long as people are quarantining and exhibiting those behaviors, maybe that's okay. But as you can see from the CDC spikes over the last 7 days in cases, that is not what's happening across the board. And so even with new things like DoorDash and Tinder and at-home testing going mainstream across the board, I think it is really challenging right now to have this right combination of vaccines and testing to make sure that we contain the pandemic.
Julia, talk about this future of the category at-home testing and telehealth, which you helped create. You've just done these 2 acquisitions. What does this look like post-pandemic? We've got about a minute left.
Absolutely. So Everlywell has been in home testing for 5 years, and we've acquired 2 companies, a 50-state telehealth network and an at-home testing company that supports payers and Medicare plans. And as we've really led the way in creating the $300 billion diagnostics-driven telehealth space. And we see a bright future in supporting our nearly 400 clients, major labs, retailers, health plans, and being able to do that moving forward. Healthcare, including diagnostics, is in a watershed moment post-pandemic, and we are leading the way in supporting with digital care. And I think there is a bright future ahead as patients demand better and as people demand better services coming out of the pandemic. That is a silver lining for sure.
All right, Everlywell founder and CEO Julia Cheek, thank you so much for joining us and for reminding us how important it is to continue to test, especially at this critical time. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking with Simon Segars, the CEO of ARM, a global chip maker, about this continuing supply shortage, which continues to have devastating impact.